have, over the summer, our listserv for Intereach grew, doubled in size. So there are some people who I know have been on the same page as far as how useful this kind of a discussion will be, but who have not joined us before. And for that reason, I was going to spend a few slides just talking about some background information about how we got to where we are and why we're doing this together. I wanted to check and make sure that it's not entirely a group who would have seen these things before. But what we'll do today is talk about what Intereach is, how we came together, and what we did over the summer at the workshop at the Science Team Science Conference that solidified sort of our group self-definition, and importantly started to talk about what do we want to do together going forward, and how can that look. So what we hope to come out of today with is just some more concrete ideas, some very communally crowdsourced ideas of how we can go toward these directions that we settled on as a group, and get people who, if you want to be more involved, if you want to take a leadership role, a facilitation role in gathering some of these, the materials we'll talk about and developing things, then we want this to be an opportunity to speak up for that too. So this is just going to be this overview, welcoming to all of you who are new, and just our group discussion. The reason that we're going to do it in two parts is I'll just give this background presentation, and then Gabriele Bammer, who is definitely a founder of all of these concepts, but who could not be at the workshop this summer, is going to give fresh eyes to our goals and moderate the discussion that we had, so that I can kind of capture live notes, and so that she can kind of bring her previous wisdom in the field to the outcomes of a workshop she wasn't at. So that'll be a really good frame of reference. So the background. So the complex challenges of our time, as we know, require interdisciplinary solutions. And this is the slide that I originally just put together to explain how I felt in a vacuum, not knowing about the science of team science or a lot of the work that had already happened, how invisible it seems like so much of the work is happening. So we know that the interactions between these disciplines and across boundaries of institution and sector are critical in order to transform the research, translate, synthesize, and so this is just a random and generic example of how different pods of research and different disciplines in those themes need to communicate back and forth. And what you notice is that when you take out the arrows, nothing is happening, no action is happening. And you have names typically associated with the people who are going to have the jobs in any of these one boxes. So when you see in the middle of your screen exposure science or history down in the bottom, you would not have that box in there probably without having a person whose job it was to produce that knowledge. But the arrows become invisible. And this group is predicated on the idea that you need those arrows, or at least the skills in those arrows, to have names on them and be explicitly assigned and valued. So as we have found in the past, when we find groups to have this message delivered to, and we've all experienced this at Science of Team Science, many of us, or in other parts of our field, which is why we're here today, the feeling is just across the board seems to be, eureka, okay, this is my people. These are the ones who are doing what I'm doing. Someone has to actually be the arrow, otherwise it's just a tragedy of the commons. And typically, someone is doing these things, especially in the absence of a defined career path and all the things that we're working on kind of institutionalizing through this group and through other efforts connected with Science of Team Science. They're doing this because they just feel that they were meant to do this. This aligns with their kind of tacit understanding and their disposition, and they feel that it is for the greater good of the project. So it's a really nice feeling when we find each other. And so you're not the sheep that's alone, separated from the flock. You're actually sort of these bizarre sheep sort of with this meta level view of everything that's happening. So we have our own flock. We're just the floating meta level sheep. So the timeline, just for background for anybody that's new, this is from a pilfered slide where I use a lot of this science of team science in my own domain-specific research on nano research, or nano environment, health, and safety forecasting. So in 2014, through that community, I met Sharon Ku, who I think is on the line, and she is a social scientist, a science, technology, and society expert, anthropology, all of these kind of melting pot of critical skills she brings to do ethnographies of people who are studying nanoscience. And I met her, and she pulled me into this world. And so I got invited to write for the Team Science Toolkit, a blog about Intereach. So I just talked about my job, and you can see that little graphic at the bottom where I said, okay, this seems to be invisible. Why don't we name the arrows? And I didn't know what I was getting into, but from that blog, I was invited to present at the Science of Team Science as a practitioner. Again, wasn't sure who was going to be at this meeting, but what I found is that everybody came up and said, oh, me too. And I met a lot of the people who were on this call, and we all similarly felt there's just not a community of practice for us. So then the Science of Team Science community created this National Academies report through the NRC, enhancing the effectiveness of team science. One of the recommendations in there, in several places, they talk about, okay, you have to have a name before this job, or you have to explicitly call out these responsibilities. They don't just magically happen. So that really elevated the idea of team science, so that it is now very visible in concept, in name anyway, to funding agencies. And you're starting to see it in NSF talking about it, definitely, certainly in NIH, that the recognition that these types of findings are important. And so what hopefully follows from that is an increased understanding that professionals who can help maximize, optimize, and just articulate the need for these skills and activities are going to become more and more prevalent. So then we had an initial workshop kind of put together by myself and Gabriele and Holly Falk-Krasinski, who I don't think can be here today, but is very involved still with Intereach and with the Science of Team Science community planning. We had just a baseline, established professional community. We already had kind of an email list that we had going, and everybody said, yeah, there's something here, but we don't know what we want to do. So we got together and started to talk about what do we think we share. And then what we did was create a listserv off of that, which all of you are on, I believe, intereach@duke.edu. We can use it more than we do if people have things to share as there gets to be momentum, but right now we really use it to either share our roles, and as you've seen recently, people when they change jobs, because we're still looking at learning examples of what do jobs like this entail. And we also use it to publicize this webinar series. So Karen Demby and Amanda McMillan have done a fantastic job. Out of this May 2016 workshop, we decided, okay, let's meet regularly and start to just have a connection and start to understand what various people within our community, whatever that may be defined as, what do we do and what do we need? So that first year went really well, and we had a second workshop in May of 2016, or 2017, pardon me, that's June of 2017, which I'll get to after the next couple of slides, to take it to the next step, to say, all right, we've had a year of interest, we've had some conversations, we've had some great introductory webinars so that we can meet one another, and now we can decide, well, what's needed and how can we pick off a bite-sized patch that's going to be communally useful but not overextend ourselves, because for many of us it's what I like to call a professional hobby. So we have to be realistic and also just very strategic in where we throw our energy. So Before I talk about the 2017 workshop, which is one of the main things to get across today to seed our discussion that we'll have, just wanted to go back and pick up some of the concepts that we've talked about before, but that may be new to folks who are coming in new to the community. So the good news is that there's a lot of rich resource available around this type of role. So Intereach, as you know, stands for Interdisciplinary Integration Research Careers Hub. So it's very focused on creating a career and the institutionalization and the training that would support such a career. It's around that, but there are a lot of different organizations and concepts already well established that are, and some new, that are worth drawing on. And it's worth mentioning here that we're not attempting with Intereach to stamp out those other names or to usurp that progress. We're really an umbrella organization that is going to look for where can we work together to help all of us as we move forward. And some might be overlapping between these other existing fields or definitions of roles, and some may be distinct, which both of those are helpful. So there's just 5 groups I wanted to talk about and highlight here because you might recognize yourself or a job that you know of more or less in one or the other. But there are some practitioners, and then there's one group that's just somewhat like Intereach, but less focused on a career path and more focused on skills in general that we'll talk about here. But all of them have to do with being the arrow. So the first I'll start with is Gabriele Bammer's Integration and Implementation Science Specialists, or I2S. I changed formats for my slides, so unfortunately the web link is a little off in the bottom. But when I first started coming to the Science of Team Science, Gabriele very graciously said, well, you may want to check out this textbook, Disciplining Interdisciplinarity, which is free, and the link below appears there, where she actually talks about 4 chapters that explicitly deal with the idea of needing a person assigned to this role, but then in a broader sense also captures what are the different skills and needs for crossing disciplinary challenges, interdisciplinary challenges. And an I2S specialist is somebody who is really a tenure track traditional academic discipline. So the case made here is that this is a separate discipline, which I believe is true, that needs methods and all of the different separate defining I guess, characteristics that sets a discipline apart. Your own journals, your own platforms, conferences, to really hone the best of the best and make it its own standalone academic discipline. So then there are also research development professionals, and you may be familiar with NORDIP, which is the National Organization of Research Development Professionals, started by Holly Fulk-Krasinski, and they are essentially mostly pre-award support. So they initiate and nurture critical partnerships, alliances, and kind of help grease the wheels and do all sorts of different things to help navigate institutions and put together proposals, maybe large centers, and put together money in some sense, but usually creating the conditions that would be necessary to begin interdisciplinary partnerships. Now, she will be quick to say that the research development does not have to limit itself in definition to pre-award. So while you might see a lot of academic deans and different people who are support at the upfront part of the research lifecycle, this concept does not have to limit itself to that at all. But that is one group of people that might recognize themselves in the Intereach community. The third we'll talk about is interdisciplinary executive scientists. And this is the one that I started calling this when I wrote that blog, just talking about my role. The thing that is different here is that it is a newly recognized class of people with specialized project management, but also translating, synthesizing research. And so they're somewhere in between And we started by saying we do in-reach to synthesize across boundaries, as well as then often outreach with that synthesized set of messages to various stakeholder groups, whether they're funders or institutional people or public, and they perform a mixture of academic and executive research. Their institutional alignments are all over the place, because a lot of times this is an organically developed job, not a permanent one per se, but often soft funding, and it doesn't have to just be in academia. This type of a role is really broad in the sectors and the types of organizations that you'll find it in. But one thing that we say in talking about the IES role is that you really need to be fluent in a field, in a relevant field to that scientific challenge at hand. It is different than a sort of project manager, facilitator that might be agnostic to the science. This is somebody embedded in the synthesizing and therefore has to be fluent in the relevant topic. And then we've added this to the list following our recent webinar, which kind of focused on the Community Engagement Fellows Program, which is the AAAS fellowship that talks about community engagement managers. And so anyone who hasn't seen that, of course, like all of our webinars, it's on our Intereach webinar archives, which you can find on the website. But as they were giving their presentation, I thought, oh, that's kind of my job too. And I think we find that in lots of different highlights of different types of Intereach jobs, is that you're going to see aspects of many different connective jobs in different roles. So community engagement professional or community manager is somebody that facilitates the activities of a community at large and facilitates these interactions. So that it might not take place within a physical group. It might be online, it might be a periodic webinar, but a lot of times it also involves, and I was happy to see they also use the term in-reach rather than outreach. And so they also share the fact that they perform a mixture of functions, and they also have to be fluent in a lot of the science, at least somewhat fluent in the science, possibly this could differ from IES a bit. But community engagement management, I have found, is something that it really does fall between the cracks of recognized activities. It's usually an also, but then it is the critical glue for moving a field forward. So I'm thrilled to have those folks involved in this community too. And then the Association of Interdisciplinary Studies, that has been around since 1979. And it's a professional organization, and it's like many of our other sort of intersectional organizations, it's founded to promote the interchange of ideas. It's now a nonprofit educational association associated with the state of Ohio. It's international in its membership, and I really recommend checking them out because they've got just, as you might imagine, having been around for so long, they have a lot of interesting archived tools. A lot of it, from what I've found, is to kind of promote the idea of interdisciplinary scholarship in the existing structures of the academy. And that's really important because the people who are in academic research, and for that matter, government research, institute research, they all need to be kind of awake to these skills. And as our community, as we'll talk about with the goals going forward, I think that one thing we need to have in mind is, what are the resources and training and different things that we might want to compile that would have the audience of the kind of the subscribing disciplinarian versus somebody like what I assume most of us are, which is a career path interdisciplinary connector. So the AIS, I think, is going to continue to be an excellent resource for all that sort of information. So this is something I put together. I changed it from the typical Venn diagram because that was dishonest in its specificity. So this is just talking about the 4 jobs that I just named, and I'm sure that there are more, but these are the ones within our community that we've talked about. The overlaps and distinctions between them are both helpful in defining what we do as a community. So what I would say, and what we kind of moved forward through the workshop this summer with, is that we really, between RDP, I2S, IES, and CEM, we really share a lot of knowledge, boundary spanning skills, and dispositional attributes, including kind of tacit wisdom, which could live in shared knowledge and disposition, really. Those things are often shared, and we'll talk more about what those are, but different ways to navigate boundaries, different skills you need to have to juggle everything, and then the interpersonal skills and emotional intelligence that you need to navigate this type of a role. Those are shared regardless of what your role is. And you may even have many overlapping responsibilities between 1 or 2 of these roles. So, so maybe your job activities could include budgeting or not. It might include meeting design and facilitation. I'm guessing most of them include that. And then it might have, you know, writing grants directly for you in the case of, say, an I2S, versus for others, you might be helping write grants for other people. And so what I broke out here just in this slide is, you know, your institutional placement for an RDP is typically academic administration, or in some organizational capacity, you're in research development support. In I2S, the institutional placement is a regular ranked tenure track faculty. And I'm sure that there are maybe some other, because faculty is so stratified, there are probably some other ways that you can imagine this, but it's the most straightforward in my view of all the different roles. I'll be interested to hear Gabriele's and others' comments on that as we go forward. And then IES, its institutional placement, it was the most fuzzy to put in bullet points, but it's kind of alt academia, if you've heard that term. It's not tenure track. It's mostly defined by things it's not. It's not a permanent position usually. It's somewhere in research organization management, and then sometimes it can be even in a lab. So maybe you're in a large lab organization and it is permanent, but you're sort of the facilitating in between. And then community engagement manager, this is just what I took away and put very recently into this slide. So I'm open for correction on this definition too, but for the purpose of this slide, I just said, okay, this is active in many sectors. And unless it's for a very large organization, it's unlikely that a community engagement manager is your entire stated role. If there are examples otherwise, then by all means, everybody give me that feedback. And then in addition to the many overlapping responsibilities, I would say that there are other things besides the institutional placement that are distinct between these job types. So one thing that's important to my way of thinking anyway, is the chief stages of the research life cycle that you're in. So is it upstream ideation and connection? Is it the development of a proposal or a project plan? Is it in facilitating the post-award actual doing of the project and in project managing skills? Is it in polishing the final science outcome deliverables? Or is it kind of overall keeping a community together that spans many different projects, but pointing everyone in the same directions? So that's what I mean by stages of the research life cycle. And then different things could be success metrics that's more and less defined in different places. Sometimes it's just the satisfaction of your direct superior, which is often the case for at least some of these. And then career trajectories obviously differ throughout these, and funding continuity as well. So that's sort of the baseline page that the very center of this, the things that are shared, is what we decided to focus on for the Team Science Conference this June. So our Intereach workshop was titled Self-Identifying the Knowledge, Skills, and Dispositional Attributes that Define the Intereach Community. And what we wanted to do there was define a baseline for community identity and a map for future activities. And as you saw on the previous slide, there was distinction focus, and then also the the shared area focus. And just as a first starting point, we thought much better to start with everything that we all share. And so Gabriele couldn't join us that on June 12th. So myself and Holly led the activities, but we did utilize a structure that Gabriele has used within her her center that she works with right now. It was really, and we used her insight on how to keep it really simple and targeted. So that was great. We did some activities. I'll talk about the outcomes. And then the next steps part, I'm just gonna briefly tell you what our ideas for next steps are, but then I wanna hand it over to a group discussion about that so that we spend more time talking between each other and less time listening to me. So the activities. We wanted to ask what is needed to deal with the subject matter and the boundary translational aspects of Intereach roles. So really the domain space of what are we having to know about to tackle the problems that we are faced with in our roles, and then also what's specific knowledge to the boundary translation. And we just decided to brainstorm in groups what's the knowledge, and knowledge being, it confers the ability to do things like define domain-specific aspects, identify experiences that are relevant to the situation, describe the best practices, make something happen. What do you have to know to make this thing happen? Versus skills, which are what do you have to do to make this thing happen? And so applying methods or approaches, applying situational awareness to navigate certain situations. And so this often can get overlapped with knowledge, but Gabriele's wise counsel to us was don't let that be a speed bump. Just kind of brainstorm and we'll figure out what's useful from all of it together. And then the third one, which again has to do with the first two, but I find that this is what people, when they first are drawn to the Intereach idea or any of those roles, this is what really kind of lights people up because they think, yeah, okay, this part is the part that's somewhat sets me apart. It's not just the things I know, but it's kind of who we are. So dispositional attributes taken from Gabriele's work is just each person's internal cognitive and moral qualities are collectively known as dispositions. And so what this means is just how are you with people? How are you towards situations? And what are just your internal settings that are brought to bear on these roles? What makes you, what is it about that personality, tacit knowledge and your disposition that aligns you with this or that comes out through your jobs? So this is better kind of explained in examples of them, but it was really neat to have everybody brainstorm all of them. There was so much overlap in the dispositional attributes between people. And so the outcomes, one is a manuscript and it's in progress. For those of you who are co-authoring, I have not reached out to you yet, and so you're not missing emails, and just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that. But this is just, here is for your enjoyment. This is the full list, which of course you can't read right now, of consolidated ideas that people brainstormed. So you can see that there's just tons of material in the knowledge and in the skills and in the dispositional attributes. A lot of it, the knowledge is kind of institutional in nature. You know, how does this place that I am work? Some of it is big picture. How does funding work? What's the funding cycle like? What's the legal constraints? Some of it is, facilitative, like you need to know some certain tools and you need to know some ways to make efficient communication happen. And then a lot of it centered around what is the knowledge you need about how to talk between people who don't understand each other, and really what is that translational bit. A lot of the skills kind of came in the same way as far as just being skilled at clear communication. So maybe not not as much focused on the knowledge of what you need to know about that communicating problem, but just, can you hear people well? Can you do active listening? Can you think of connections? Can you juggle many things in your mind at one time? And can you bring out the best in everybody? Can you deploy humor at the right time? And then dispositional attributes were really interesting. Desire to check ego at the door, resilience, adaptability, humility. You might be able to see some of these, collaborator naturally, kind of introspective, those types of things, team player, coach, all these types of rules. And so, the one that I liked that came up across a lot of the different groups is high integrity, which I think is really neat because you really are kind of working for the greater good, and you are really having to focus on being clear. And in some cases, you're doing all this with no sort of institutional incentives for being great at that specific part of your job. You're just doing it because it is the right way to make everything come out the best it can. So anyway, this was really fun to do with everybody, and so we'll share this as it develops. And if you were there and you want to be involved in this and have not reached out to me, I will consolidate this and send it out, so you can still have time to reach out to me. So this is the manuscript in progress, just self-defining. But then through that, we talked about, well, what should we do next? And it came into two buckets. So developing the profession and professional development. So developing the profession is just making the case for the fact that these roles and career paths should be institutionalized. And with that comes a lot of sort of things that follow from that we can talk about. And then professional development is really the training and educational resources that need to be brought together and developed in order to rise up this profession that we're making the case to develop. So those are sort of the two buckets. And of course, you can see that there's just tons of stuff, many recommendations that were in the National Academy's report that come out of reading Gabriele's book as well, will fit in these two buckets. But because we know there's a limited number of hours that we can dedicate to this, what we want to do is a lot of double dipping with these efforts and making sure that what we all contribute to whatever we do together benefits all of us in a great way. So the next steps in terms of developing the profession are the things, these are just examples of what came out of the discussion. So this is the one where we make the case for institutionalizing these career paths. So ideas were compile metrics, different ideas of or examples at different universities of how, and labs. I don't want to always go back to the university as the defining kind of sector, but how are people measured in terms of success? And then one idea, it's kind of a specific metric, but it's really developing how do you quantify the opportunity costs of not having somebody dedicated to this. And then compiling resources and slides for communal use. So what I mean by this is we have a lot of science of team science professionals that study the utility of science of team science and putting it into practice. And so maybe we could even put together like a slide bank. So for instance, I have the opportunity to make the case at my university that there should be somebody focused on post-award support in a team science basis. Well, it would be great if there's some communal use slide bank where I can go grab something and say, okay, this is going to be a good thing for me to elevate, and how can we put that all together? I think we'll have some people that are willing to contribute to that. The next thing, and we'll go back to this and when we kick off the discussion part, but the next thing is the professional development. So one idea that came up at the meeting, Christine Lund was helpful in putting together actually an ad hoc meeting over lunch to talk about this further, was to develop an international and communally sourced MOOC of sorts. And so I know that Holly has has taught a team science course, I think together with Julie Klein, we might be able to use some of that material to either take back to our own institutions or just to refer to as individuals. But we thought about what if we even created a MOOC where people would take one module each, and it could be international. We had a couple people from Europe and one from Korea saying, well, what if we rotated this so that together it would be a semester or a year of seminars, and then we could place that on the Team Science Toolkit. And then in the spirit of kind of leveraging everybody's work and also inviting anybody who wants to be a leader in this field into the fold, Suzanne Curry, who was at our 2016 workshop, if any of you met her, has moved to University of Exeter, and you may have received her Team Science Education and Training Survey. And so she's really trying to compile a lot of different resources herself. And so a lot of these are the things that she took out of a survey she conducted as part of the Team Science workshop. So when you signed in, you got this survey that you could take. And most training, I guess, is done through professional development workshops. This doesn't come as a surprise to me, but that's not available to everybody, depending on your goal. Are you educating students? Are you educating professionals who already have these jobs? Or are you educating disciplinarians in these skill sets so they can be ready for working across boundaries? The second point, exactly, there's hardly anything aimed at university students, and then there has to be more people out here doing this. So this survey right here, you can see, is her attempt to just gather more information. So we could help leverage that, and we can put our energy behind it as a community. So those are just the sort of 2 or 3 seed ideas for each of these buckets of developing the profession and professional development that we thought we could focus on. And what I mean by focus on, and that is also up for discussion, is purposely have webinars throughout the next year that highlight or serve as working sessions for us to bring materials to the the webinar and then create something. It could mean having side meetings of people who speak up on the listserv and say, hey, we want to be putting this together, and we can house it on the Intereach website. It can be whatever we want, but probably, it's in the idea of side projects and the idea of putting together resources for all of us to use. I hadn't envisioned us going for grants or something at this point, or trying to incorporate as a separate organization. For now, I was thinking these are communal activities, and that we would stay as Intereach as a neighborhood of science, of team science community, just so all of our efforts are on the substance and less on the kind of the logistics and execution. But that just to frame what is meant by what can we do together. So I think with that, that's all I had prepared. Let's see what time it is. Okay, so hopefully now we can spend the same amount of time now discussing amongst ourselves, and I'm happy to take notes or to go back to different slides as Gabriele moderates. But thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
Great, thanks, Christine. So as you will probably see on the screen, I'm Gabriele Bammer. We have 13 people on this call, so leaving out Christine and myself, that's 11 of you. What I'm going to suggest we do is I'm going to call on you to introduce yourself and maybe make one comment in the first instance. And what it would be great to do, I see most of you are muted, which is terrific, and many of you have video capacity. So what I'm going to suggest is that when you have the floor, you turn your video on so that people can see you if you have that capacity. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to call on Pips Veazey first to just say who you are and show your face if you've got video, and maybe make one or two comments based on what Christine has said.
Oh, thank you, Gabrielle, and thank you, Christine. That was a great overview. It's always nice to see your faces, both of your faces, and hear your voices. I feel like every time we get together and we talk about things, I feel like this conversation just takes another step forward, and I think that's really exciting. Some of the work that I've done for my PhD recently definitely supports a lot of that last workshop that we did at the Science of Team Science, so I'm really excited to see it moving forward. I've had several requests lately to consult with teams, and so I'm thinking a lot about what a training would look like for teams and pulling together resources and kind of putting my own spin on it, and I'd love to have a conversation about that. I think thinking about what a curriculum looks like for people who are interested in doing this stuff is really a great place to go as well. And I think there's a bunch of things that have happened recently that kind of set the foundation for that. A couple of conversations at the Science of Team Science meeting that Christine referenced. So I'm really optimistic about where we are, and I just keep seeing people like Christine and Gabrielle and Holly and others, helping the whole group move forward, and I'm so grateful for that. So I'll stop there and apologize that I need to run very soon, but I'll go back and look at the video. Thank you.
Thanks. And for those of you who don't know, Pips has done one of the webinars, so if you want to find out more about her, that's a place to go. If there's anybody else who needs to leave quickly, can you send me a chat? So Kara, are you still there? If you are, do you want to introduce yourself and make a comment? I think Kara might have skipped out. All right, let me then move on to Gretchen. Can you introduce yourself and just make a comment on what you've heard?
Hi, yes, my name's Gretchen Gehrke. I live in Durham, North Carolina, and know Christine. And I am, I'm really interested in this because I've felt in different capacities that there's this push for science communication, but it's always focused on the lay population, in which a lot of detail can be lost. And so I am really interested in the kind of field development of that science communication at multiple levels of detail, in order to create both the kind of macro scale overview and like the kind of like the micro scale microcosms that fit into that. I'm particularly interested in this right now because I'm feeling out what the next steps of my career are, and I've done environmental chemistry research in academia, and recently more like grassroots environmental advocacy and kind of public science work, citizen science stuff. And I'm actually really interested in getting into more like policy influence now, in which I think that a lot of that communication among different kinds of scientists and with the lay populations is going to be really important. So I'm interested in that and in building collaborations here.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Sharon, do you want to introduce yourself and make a comment?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So I'm Sharon Ku. I'm I'm an anthropologist. Christine just mentioned our relationship in the past few years. I worked closely with Christine to study her nano center, and also we talked about try to address this interface between social science, technology, and studies, which we call STS, and the science of team science. And I would like to make a comment on education. So currently, I'm work for the Department Engineering Society. So most of my students are engineers, and I just found that the reason why reach scientists or people who are categorized them as interdisciplinary practitioner are often can be ignored or not be awarded in our current university system is because a lot of scientists, a lot of students, a lot of faculty, they still think science and technology or innovation as a kind of a individual aha moment. They are looking for that. So they didn't, even they know, well, we need to work together, but while they are kind of characterizing themselves, their identity, they always think kind of very individually. And so I think one thing we can do together as an ethnographer and as a team science practitioner is to produce more case and reveal the core of innovation. It's really a collective enterprise, and it just to correct the current misunderstanding of innovation is very much a genius activities rely on individual brain.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Sharon. Tariq, do you want to go next? Introduce yourself and make a comment on what you've heard and a suggestion.
Hi, this is Tarek Fadel at MIT. I'm an assistant director for a center called the Marble Center for Cancer Nanomedicine. Yeah, Christine and Stacy's there too. We go way back when I used to work in an office that supports the National Nanotechnology Initiative. And I really, I just have to say first that I have deep appreciation for a lot of the work that's been done, team science in a broader perspective, but also a lot of the work that Christine's been doing, pioneering some of her perspective in the work. And I just wanted to say that a lot of the takeaway I've gotten from so far was, at a core, when we look at team science, and we have to also realize we all come from an academic environment that kind of helped us flourish into appreciating team science. And so what I've been trying to do here at MIT is, in some respect, trying to go back and, first of all, just kind of realize that academics in general, the role of academics has evolved tremendously. So, a lot of times we expect, at least in biotechnology and nanoscience, nanomedicine, we expect these academics as become professor, join a new university to sit in advisory boards, run their own companies, or launch their ventures. And so what I'm trying to do here at MIT is actually, borrowing on this perspective, is to launch a new program where I'm gonna try to provide some opportunities for a lot of the postdocs, especially to kind of transcend disciplinary boundaries and just basically build kind of like science leadership, management, and all the other things that they just expect you to learn on the run when you become an academic nowadays. So I'll be launching this program really soon, and so I just wanted to again thank Christine and many of you for just kind of like the inspiration, all those great activities you're doing. Thanks.
Terrific. Thanks very much. Matt, do you want to say something?
Hi everybody. I'm Matt Hotze. I think I've met quite a few of you, maybe not in person, but online. So I work with the Nanotechnology Enabled Water Treatment Center here at Rice University, and we're an engineering research center that's funded by the National Science Foundation. So I've been hearing a lot of other comments, and I think that I can really stack onto these same themes. I like the idea of training the trainers. So having a body of people out there that understands how to work with teams and is sort of, I don't know, I don't want to say certification, but just sort of legitimizing this role of maybe like a consultant, because basically when I came into this role, they had consultants come in to work on the proposal, and so the main goal of those people is to win the money. Okay, and the goal isn't to think about how the team will function after the money is delivered. And I showed up a couple weeks after the money was delivered, And you realize very quickly that it's like an airplane. So if you take off and if just after takeoff, you're 1 degree off, right? You're going to be very far from your destination. And so those team things that happen even before, like the promises that are made before the team is even formed, during the proposal process, those are critical to the function of the team. And so having people that a university can call on to be consultants, either in-house or external, I think is absolutely important, because these projects, a lot of times, like I said, they're getting proposal consultants, but they're not really, these consultants aren't really focused on the results. They're focused on the result. For them is the money is delivered, and then they disappear. So I think there's a role for the Intereach group there. And then on top of that, I think that we could really do a better job of marketing, right? So when Christine talks about these resources to like, here's some graphs that demonstrate what is going on when you have an effective team versus just a bunch of individuals. Like, we've seen that in multiple presentations in this webinar series. So why not, maybe the idea is to really get some marketing out there from Intereach that says, okay, we're gonna advertise this out almost to really dispel the myth about what, like Sharon was talking about, the myth of the lone genius, right? The myth that somebody is just working in their lab and they come up with a eureka moment. That truly is a myth, and there needs to be almost a active marketing campaign from a group like Intereach to counteract that. So that's probably too much, but.
Terrific. Thanks very much. Suzanne, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Gabrielle. It's great to see you. I come from can you guys hear me okay? Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
okay?
We can. We're just muted, so it takes us a little while to get back to you.
Okay. So I come from a really different perspective. I'm a veterinarian by training, and I have an MBA, but I'm very passionate about helping more traditional academic researchers communicate across disciplines. I had a position for a year at Kansas State University in Olathe, Kansas, as project director for a comparative and translational research center. And my job was to help facilitate scientific collaborations among the 12 research institutions across the state line of Kansas and Missouri, so it would all play together nicely and do kumbaya, and I had no budget and 12 months to accomplish that. So it was really quite a challenge. I do think that we, despite some adversity, made some progress, but it was a classic example of, I think, functioning in this role as an interdisciplinary facilitator and trying to help people communicate across silos and to work collaboratively. And there were some good things that came out of it. So I'm no longer in Kansas City. I'm working as a regular veterinarian doing vomiting and diarrhea again, and still very passionate about all of this. And the big overarching theme of the domain that I'm trying to work in is One Health. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the One Health concept, but it's basically the idea that there's an inextricable relationship between human health, animal health, and environmental health. And so what I met Gabriele in 2013 at the Science of Team Science meeting and participated in her I2S workshop. And she introduced me to this idea of systems thinking and how that was an important tool for doing what I was interested in trying to do, which is to facilitate One Health ideas and functional implementations. And so I've been pursuing that. I'm currently enrolled at Worcester Polytech Institute in their online system dynamics course, which I've taken one class successfully. It's very expensive, so I'm learning as much as I can on my own until I can get resources to go again. So I think the bottom line is I'm very interested in, finding my spot in this organization, and I think I would designate myself as a community engagement manager, and learning what the skills are, the additional skills are to function in this role and have effective projects come to fruition. and to be able to share what I've learned and help equip other people to function in this role. So that's who I am.
Terrific, thank you. Karen, do you want to say something?
Sorry about that. There was the lag time with the microphone. I'm the Administrative Director for the Team Science Resource here at the North Carolina Translational and Clinical Sciences Institute. It's one of the 62 CTSAs in the U.S. And I've been working on team formation with researchers. And when working with teams who are at the very beginning, interdisciplinary teams who are at the very beginning of their conversations about research. So I'm always interested in how to get people to make friends at the very beginning and how to build trust at the very beginning of their conversations, and how to help support them continue to work together long enough to become productive. As far as this group is concerned, I went to the workshop last summer, and I remember when we got to the point of talking about making the case. And I think one reason I'm so comfortable with this group and is that we all do have this challenge of articulating our value to the powers that be where we work. So I love the idea of building a repository of slides and other resources that can help us maybe share, what our value is with people that we work with. And it also will probably help us as well in when we try to recruit teams and talk them into working together for the first time. So that's kind of where I am. Thanks, Gabrielle.
Thank you. So thank you everyone for that, getting the conversation started. There are a couple of people online who don't have microphone access who will send in comments if they have anything to add. And I don't think I've missed anybody, but if I have, now's your chance to say something. While you're thinking about that, what I'd like to do is we've put up a bunch of good ideas, and I'd like to come back to what Tariq was saying, which is something that he's specifically doing right now, which is setting up a postdoc course. And I want to invite anybody else who's doing something right now to talk about what it is that they're doing, and maybe also if there's any so we've got things for that we'd like to do, but I'd like to talk about what we're doing, and if there are any requests for help in that, and that includes you, Tariq. I don't know if you've got if there's anything the rest of us could do to help you with what you're trying to do. So I'm going to open the floor for anybody who wants to chime in at this point.
This is Tariq, and just to kind of clarify, it's not really a course. It's basically an initiative that we're, because postdocs typically, and it depends on the institutional environment, usually have kind of like their own, realm of responsibilities and things they have to actually get done. They are actually unusually difficult to motivate or invite to participate in these type of initiatives, where you kind of provide them with tools for professional development, particularly if they want to pursue academic careers. They will quickly realize that there are things such as managing a team or even managing a budget as a PI. There are things that you basically are, destined to learn on the run. And the idea behind these types of initiatives is to kind of give them a flavor of what they need to do before they actually get to the job. And so what we're doing here is, kind of give them, probably about a few hours a month even, just to, lower the level of commitment, try to get them to invest some time where they could, participate in this competitive program, apply for it, think of it as a scholarship program. And they can actually pursue things outside of the lab where they can actually just kind of, flourish in terms of their academic career. But that's basically the idea behind it, just because, you'll hear stories after another about, how a lot of times you end up pursuing an academic career and you realize that academics now are nothing like they used to be. I mean, they have to kind of fulfill a lot of different responsibilities. And so we're trying to answer to that.
Thank you very much for that clarification. That was very helpful. So is part of what you're going to do producing lectures, or is it more going to be interactive group work? And I guess the reason I'm asking is that there is this idea of the MOOC, the Massive Open Online Course, and of course MIT with Harvard runs the edX platform. So you might be in a position to get this idea of the MOOC kicked off. Is that a feasible thing for you, or not particularly?
I think, and kind of just, inspired by a lot of the discussions that were done here, with some of the topics or items that Christine has also discussed in her presentation. A lot of the focus on the personality is something that we want to do. Places like MIT have tendencies when it comes to development in terms of, management. They focus a lot more on the technology, and here we really want to focus on the people. And so the idea here would be to kind of look at, an aspect maybe of team science in some ways, but trying to borrow from that and just get them to learn how to transcend disciplinary boundaries, how to use convergent approaches to answer complicated questions, but doing that by learning how to work in a team, learning how to manage, and learn how to take feedback constructively, and also coach when it comes to, when they're going to start working and having their own students. There's really a personality aspect that needs, I think, an in-person type of dynamic. And so we'll probably steer away from MOOC for now, but what we'll do is we'll potentially, the way I see it, because it's going to be launched really soon, it's still a pilot, but we'll have a small sample of postdocs. It'll be a competitive process, but then what we'll do is we get them to sit together, do a goal setting activity, and focus really on science management, science leadership, communication, and then provide them, because this is MIT, provide them with an opportunity to engage in some sort of a translational activity in terms of engaging in industry, whether it's shadowing someone in industry or having a lunch with an executive, but ultimately just remaining in the context that they will end up potentially being an academic, how this can further inspire them to respond to the needs of this next generation academic, basically.
Tariq, that's great. Thank you so much. Anybody else got something on the boil that they want to share with the group? We're all being very shy now. Suzanne.
This is something I'm actually working on immediately. There's an organization called Ethos Vet, and it's a group of about 14 veterinary specialty and emergency hospitals across the country. They're at San Diego, Chicago, Denver area, and Boston, greater Boston area. They have an educational platform called Vet Bloom, and I'm developing some content to facilitate interdisciplinary clinical teams. They are very interested in seeing how systems thinking tools can be done to, implemented to teach people the consequences of their actions and how it plays out in the system from a clinical outcome perspective and also from a profitability perspective. And the idea, again, there's a pilot experiments that we're developing. The idea is that we would like to encourage people to participate in small groups as a means of creating a practice field for them to develop these skills. So that's something that I'm currently working on.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Anybody else got something they want to throw in while you're collecting your thoughts? I think most of you know by now, but one of the things that I've been doing for some time is developing a blog, a community blog that many people contribute to. So this is the Integration and Implementation Insights blog, or I2 Insights blog. And the blog's really moving ahead. It's really a way for people to share methods for dealing with complex problems, concepts and methods. We're getting more and more new contributors, more and more people from more and more countries, and the readership is also growing. I guess I've got great ambitions for what we should be aiming for. So the average blog post gets about 370 views. Our record is 2,000 plus. So I'd like to ratchet that up quite considerably. But of course, so I guess the reason I'm mentioning this is anybody who'd be interested in writing a blog post about some of what they're doing, I'd be very interested to hear from you. Okay, Sharon's, so we're losing people at a great rate of knots. If nobody else wants to volunteer something that they're doing now, Christine, I might turn it back to you for a moment. You're doing a great job summarising the notes, summarising the conversation. Is there something that you want to add in? I'm not getting a strong sense that we're going to get a lot of people volunteering to take things up, but we will come on to that. But Christine, back to you for a moment.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. I always enjoy your facilitation. You get everybody's input so well. So one thing I thought, I forgot to do the, okay. So one thing that we're doing here at SAINT, well, it's not really part of SAINT, it's part of the Science and Society Initiative, and it may not be possible everywhere, but it has been really worthwhile as a very far upstream integrating activity. There's a type of course that you can propose at Duke that is an interdisciplinary course. So I designed it a year ago, and we just started it this year, and it has, it's a project-based course. It goes for a whole year, and I wonder if an increasing number of universities wouldn't be open to this type of creative approach, because there's more and more call for team science, but people don't know what it is. But the people teaching it are a law professor, a decision sciences professor. I'm leading it in environmental sciences and risk assessment. We have the head of women's studies, who's also an English professor, and we also have an atmospheric scientist. And we're co-teaching a holistic course trying to look at all the decisions that had to do with refrigerated coolants and the risk-risk trade-offs over time. And the process of putting the course together has caused us to develop pedagogical approaches to interdisciplinary student interactions, and also has created all these interesting sparks between the professors. So it's resource intensive, but it hits a lot of the different boxes. It's seeding potential research, it's creating educational training, and it's also just experiential. So that's my answer to your question for what's going on. It's been quite fun. But then in general, I wonder if, we have a small group of folks still on. I wonder what people think to kind of continue Gabrielle's conversation in a broader sense, if we could wrap up this webinar by sending out a question to the listserv, the Intereach listserv, saying, hey, here's the archive of our webinar. Would you like to tell us something you're doing right now, if it has anything to do with training, and anything to do with training or community engagement support, or just activities, concrete activities you're doing now that you'd want to share? And ask if anybody wants to share even their slides so that we could put them on the Intereach website in a common repository. Maybe that would be a way to sort of operationalize these ideas of gathering things together. What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you. While people are kind of thinking about that, Suzanne's asked if it's possible to get a copy of the recording. And yes, so all of the webinars are recorded thanks to Matt's great efforts, and they're on both the Intereach website and also on the Integration and Implementation Sciences, or I2S, YouTube channel. And that information gets sent out after each recording is made on the listserv. So back to Christine's suggestion about whether we should send out a request. I think, yes, of course you should send out a request on the listserv, but I think the question is more about what it should ask people for. And starting the repository of slides sounds like, or of PowerPoints, sounds like an easy lift for people. Other suggestions that people would have that would that Christine, that might be easy to ask for at this stage? Well, what I think we might do in that case is I might do another round robin with who's on the call, and give you a chance to have to just throw in anything else that's come up as a result of the conversation, and that you might want to add, and particularly think about Christine's request. What can we add? What can we ask the listserv for, or anything else that you want to add? So, Matt, do you want to go first this time?
Thanks. It just took me a second to unmute. So actually, I would wonder if we could ask also about a skills repository kind of thing. So, for example, after a couple of webinars, I volunteered to host these webinars and record things because I just know how to do this. So there might be people out there that know, for example, how to make videos, or that know something about I don't know, something else that we don't even realize that they have a background to do. So maybe that's a good way to kind of tap into the community of, okay, here's something that I can do really easily for you guys, and that might be a good way to start, because it'll show what's available that will be lower cost, obviously.
That's a great idea. Thank you very much. Karen, do you want to chime in?
Sure. One of the things that we can do as I see these ideas develop is to just sort of leave the question itself open-ended to give people a chance to suggest something that they might have that might be less of a heavy lift, that they might need to explain a bit more.
Great. Thank you. Suzanne.
My main thing is reiterating Matt's comment. I think it would take me a little bit of a while, but I've certainly learned a lot of things that have worked for me and have not worked for me in both an academic environment and in a more industry-based environment. But I think accumulating skills and experiences.
Suzanne, we're losing you. You've gone from being very audible to being very quiet.
Can you hear me now?
Not very well.
Okay, go to someone else.
There isn't actually anybody else to go to, so why don't you persist?
It must be my internet connection.
That's
Can you
better.
hear me now?
Yep. Speak loudly.
Okay, so I really liked Matt's idea. I think it's really accumulating experiences and skills that have worked as we experiment trying to function in this domain would be very helpful to accumulate.
I mean, I think I'll add on to that, if you don't mind, Gabrielle. I think that, for example, there might be people amongst us that know how to work with different MOOC platforms or other things like that. So if we're considering building a MOOC, and I'm sure that Tariq has developed some skills related to his postdoc course, or whatever fellowship, those things, there's just certain little things that maybe we just can combine to make it our powers combined, right? Anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I think the idea of giving some specific examples that are quite different from each other, I think would also help people to seed that conversation. So we're down to a very select group of participants now. So Suzanne, relax, Suzanne. Christine, I'm going to hand it back to you to kind of wrap it up and send us on our way.
Okay. Well, Gabrielle, thank you. Thanks to everybody for your input. I know we're a small group of people right now, but I think that there is a really broad appetite for the things we're putting together and a lot of creativity. I mean, you can already see really diverse type of ideas we have because of the different worlds we're in, creating systems thinking outreach to help veterinarians think across boundaries is so different than reaching out from water engineers to industry. And I think that it's neat to see how that's all coming together. So I like that we're going to have an email that goes out asking for this. One question I have for you is, because we have such a small group, do you want to see, what I'll do is send it out after we have the archive video, so that I can send out one saying, here, catch the webinar, and then also here are some asks. And first I was thinking I would pass it back through you for your edits, but actually I think it's better if I don't do that, and then if you have something to add to the list, you can get a conversation going. So feel free to add liberally when you see the email come out, say, oh, also this. And maybe I can work with Matt and anyone else who wants to chime in right now in order to figure out the best way to put these all these resources. So I think what we should say is they'll be in a shared, maybe a Google Doc type of form that is linked on through the Intereach webpage. So we'll just say, hey, be sure that you want it shared with everyone. And if you want, I guess maybe that I'm thinking out loud, of course, as we wrap up here, but maybe we should also offer the option for people to share it with Intereach and not with the general public by putting it on the Intereach wide website. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, folks? Should we give that option to not share with the entire universe?
Well, one of the things you might think about for PowerPoint presentations is using SlideShare.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure whether I suspect you can make a private group in SlideShare so that people could have a choice between whether they make their slides generally available or whether they make them available only to the Intereach group.
Okay.
So, I'm a great believer in using resources that are already out there rather than reinventing them ourselves. And I think SlideShare works quite well, although I never get around to put anything on it myself.
Yeah.
I think I've got one set of slides on there from a way back.
Okay, so maybe I'll ask people to send them by email and then indicate in the email whether they want it public or private, and then we can kind of start.
Well, they could load them onto SlideShare themselves as well. Okay. So, they can send you the SlideShare link.
Okay.
And if that's going to be, a focus of effort, then it's worth kind of thinking that through a little bit in terms of how it might work well.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll do that, and I like that we have something to get going with. So not only slides, but if you want to then just answer with your skills, and I'll have those examples that you guys put that I've captured here. And then I think another push, along with the spirit, Gabriele, of not reinventing something that's happening, but leveraging, maybe another push for Suzanne Curry's training course. And then, as always, people can submit their ideas for a follow-on webinar, what's going to be most helpful for us. Because I feel like we're at the very beginning of this really catching on, and we can be part of helping everyone realize what it means to operationalize this idea of interdisciplinarity and how can it play out. So thanks, everybody. I'll give you your 4 minutes back, and really appreciate your time and really love conversing with all of you.
All right, thanks.
All right, thanks.